So personal finance is our topic. And I think as we go through it, you'll see that in a lot of ways, what you've learned about in financial accounting and in managerial accounting relates to your own personal finance. There are differences, of course, but you'll see a lot of similar concepts. For example, companies have goals, right? They have their strategic goals and their short-term goals. And it helps them stay focused, right? Helps them make decisions if they know what their goals are. And same thing with us as individuals. If you don't have any goals, then kind of wander through life and see what happens, right? And there's, to some degree, that's okay. Because if you're too goal oriented, sometimes you miss important opportunities that are out there. So it's really about finding the right balance. I think it's useful to have goals that you're working towards, but also realize when it's time to change those goals or take a different approach. But I do think it is a good idea to have goals. There's a phrase, I think it's from Through the Looking Glass or Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Okay? So I think it's kind of an interesting way to think about it. But if you do know where you're going, then you need to chart a path, right? You have to figure out what is the right way. So having goals would definitely be something I'd recommend. And as it says here, well, okay, setting a goal is really only the first step, right? So then how are you going to achieve that goal? Then you actually have to do it, right? You implement the plan. When things get hard, you either stick with it or you change your goal or you change your plan, right? But don't just give up. And then eventually reach whatever goal you have. And by that time, guess what? You've got some new goals, right? As we get closer to whatever our desired future is, well, there's always more, right? You get one job, it's great. Then you start thinking, oh, but I'd really like this other job. Or you drive one car for a couple of years and you think, okay, this is good, but it's getting old. Maybe now it's time to get a new car. So it's an ongoing process. Now, we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy. I think back on day one of the course, when I went through the learning journey presentation, which I know some of you have seen multiple times. Plus, you probably remember Maslow's hierarchy from Intro to Business or psychology courses. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, I promise. But just as a quick refresher, what Maslow said is we have different levels of needs. Some needs are more immediate. They consume our attention more. Things like hunger, being sleepy, are considered more urgent typically than some of these more psychological needs like social interaction, self-esteem. And Maslow said that eventually you can reach self-actualization. In fact, I was curious how he defined it, because I always had a hard time explaining what self-actualization was. I felt like I understood it, but it was hard for me to put in words. So I actually found a quote from Maslow where he explained it. So he said it is a tendency that might be phrased as the desire to become more and more what one is. Interesting. To become more of what you already are. To become everything that one is capable of becoming. And I find it really interesting, he calls it a tendency. Like it's kind of a natural phenomenon. Like as these lower level needs are met, just sort of something that happens, that you begin to self-actualize. So you might feel like you're already pretty good at being what you're capable of becoming. Some people feel that way. I think a lot of times when people are young, though, they don't. They're still figuring out what they're capable of. And maybe they're realizing they don't know as much as they want to know. They don't have the skills they want to have, or the abilities, right? It took me a long time to figure out I was never going to be a singer. Even though I wanted to in my teenage years, it just wasn't in the cards, right? So as we figure out what we really are capable of becoming, what's that? Our goals evolve. We move up Maslow's hierarchy, right? We always have to make sure we sustain these lower levels as we proceed and try to reach the higher levels. So if we think about, for example, what's involved here, and I think I talked to you about this at the beginning of the semester as well, the money is useful in this process, right? Like, for the most part, you don't get fed for free unless your parents are feeding you. But when you're on your own, for the most part, you got to earn some money in order to get the food, right? Even if you think, oh, I'll just go plant my own food. Well, it's not that easy. If you can do that, if you can find a way to grow all your own food, great. But that's not that easy. So we typically, in our society, we have to earn money to pay for our basic necessities, right? And rent. And not so much for the psychological needs. Money can be useful there, but it's not as essential. And it might be useful in helping us self-actualize, right? You might find to self-actualize, you're going to start a business, and that requires some money, or you need to get a master's degree, and that requires some money. So money is useful, but what I really want to highlight is money is a tool, right? Money is not actually anywhere on Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, even think about what it is, right? It's something that we as humans invented. But you don't really. Okay, let me put it this way. There are people on the planet still that live in societies that don't use money. There aren't too many, but if you go like deep in the Amazon rainforest or some obscure corners of the world, there are still some people living the way that they've lived for thousands of years, and they don't have money. Maybe they trade some things, but they don't really have a currency, right? So money is not essential for human survival, but in our society, it's kind of become essential. So it's a tool. And as we go through this whole project, focusing on money, I don't want you to get the impression that that is the goal, right? It's a tool. Now, I attended a conference where I learned something interesting. If you took Intro to Business with me, we talked about Herzberg and how he said that money is not a motivator, it's a hygiene factor. Even if you took that class with somebody else, you might have learned it. It's a very common theory that some things are motivators. They motivate us to want to work harder, and other things don't. And he put money in the don't category, which is really weird to think about, right? Because we think of money as something that we go to work for, right? Most people would not take a job if it didn't pay, right? Well, there are some people that volunteer, right? They work hard. I know some people that work really hard as volunteers and don't get paid a penny, but they love it. So money doesn't itself cause us to want to work harder, except in certain situations. If we need it to pay the bills, right, to survive, then yeah, we're going to do whatever it takes to get the money. But See, it's not really the money. The money is just a medium to get us what we really need. It's really the need for food and a place to live, right? That is the motivator, and the money is the tool in the process.
And if you hate your job, they always sort of that little part of something. Money, because you don't like. You're not gonna do
Yeah, exactly. So what causes you to want to work harder on the job is typically not money. It's the culture, it's the environment, it's the work itself, it's feeling like you're accomplishing something. These are the things that motivate us if we define motivation as causing us to want to do a better job. Right? Money is more like kind of like a, I don't know, I mean, it's something that causes us to react, but it doesn't really motivate us. Okay. So, anyways, I attended this conference where they talked about money as a motivator, and it was a conference about basically the psychology of learning and how our brains. Well, I guess psychology is how our brains work, but how our brains work in an educational setting. And one thing that I thought was really interesting, like think about people that go to casinos. Gambling can be addictive, right? And gambling is about money. That's the goal there, right? You put money in the slot machine, you pull the slot. You don't know if you're going to win or not. You figure you're probably going to lose. Why is it so addictive? Because every once in a while, when you do win, you get all these endorphins and dopamine and everything, and that makes it addictive. That's interesting. The money can drive people's behavior, right? But I don't know that it's really even the money that they want. It's the fact that they won or that they beat the system. I don't know.
The girl Travis did was like this idyllic gambling and like for kleptos. Like it's not about getting the stuff, it's
right.
Just the thrill of doing it.
Just the thrill of doing it. Exactly. Yeah. So, anyways, I think you get the idea. Okay, but I'm not done with this idea. Einstein said something that I think is really interesting, and it helps us put this whole, not even money, into the appropriate context. I think it puts the way we think about the world into a different context. Everybody knows Einstein, right? Famous physicist. Okay. So he said, a human being, okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to focus on just the bold part. Human beings experience himself, his thoughts, and feeling as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. Einstein's saying, we think of ourselves as like, I'm me, you're you, we're distinct from one another. But he's saying that that is a delusion. Why is he saying that? So he says that this delusion restricts us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Why is it we care about the well-being of our family members, but we don't care about the well-being of somebody on the other side of the planet? This is a human, that's a human. Well, because we have a relationship with this person, right? But if we had a relationship with that other person on the other side of the planet, we care about them too, right? And so we go through life, focusing on our own desires, our own, progress up Maslow's hierarchy. We think about those around us, but we're kind of disconnected from nature, disconnected from the rest of humanity. So he says here, our task is to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. I didn't know Einstein was a hippie. Sounds like me. I'm a hippie at heart, so I say that with love. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but striving for such achievement is in itself the foundation for inner security. Okay? Maslow talked about safety and security. Einstein's saying our security comes from being freed from this sort of material, selfish consciousness and to expand to a more global consciousness. And he's coming from the position of somebody who understands the material world, space and time, better than anybody, right? But he's saying, hey, it's not about this space and time, it's about compassion. Which I think makes money look even more trivial. So obviously money is important, but it's not the most important thing. Other physicists, even back from Einstein's time, were saying I think very profound things about the nature of reality. Like quite a few, Schrodinger, Planck, who you see quoted here, quite a few of the early quantum physicists basically said the material world is really not what's real. That reality is consciousness, and the material world arose out of consciousness. And then, I know that's getting kind of metaphysical, but it further trivializes something like money. How important is money in the whole scheme of things? Okay, so to sum it up, money does help us meet our lower level, right? It's the way our society is structured, it is necessary. But other things, self-actualization, esteem, are less dependent on money. And so, like I included this picture of a lamp here. You can kind of think of your physical self as the lamp. But think of who you truly are as the light inside the lamp. Right? So yeah, you need the money to have the lamp, to have your house. But it doesn't change who you are internally as a person. So that is my caveat as we go through this, and I will try to teach you how to grow your money better, position yourself financially, build your net worth, right? But keep in mind, that is not the goal. That's just a tool to help you achieve your other goal. Are there any questions or comments so far? Okay, so to take this a step further, when we look at the happiest countries in the world, according to many different metrics, there are different organizations that have tried to study this. But I think it's interesting what they come up with. So this is from 2015. This is the World Happiness Report. And it looked at which countries in the world had the happiest citizens. Now, the countries that are listed are not necessarily the wealthiest countries, right? In fact, the United States is definitely up there as far as the wealthiest or one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but we're way down on the list in terms of happiness, right behind Mexico. Now, if you're curious, how did they come up with this? Well, there were several factors. So they did look at the economic wealth, GDP, which you know, gross domestic product, right? They looked at the gross domestic product divided by the population as one portion of happiness. Because obviously, if people are super poor, where they can't even get health care, they don't have a place to live, obviously that's going to impact their happiness. But they looked at so many other things: social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, perception of corruption. So obviously, if you feel like you live in a corrupt society, that would lead to unhappiness. Less of that would lead to more happiness. And then I think it says everything else. Yeah. everything else. Okay. So looking at all these different metrics, they had to gather all this data and analyze it. And you'll find other reports that have different results, but they're not that different. So I think that there is quite a bit of credibility in this analysis. Which are the happiest countries? Well, we see Switzerland, Iceland, the Nordic countries, the ones, the kind of Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Norway, Finland are there, Netherlands and Sweden, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. All of those countries have very different models in the United States. People tend to pay more taxes, but they also have more social safety net. They often get free college, free healthcare, less cost of living in general. So maybe their jobs don't pay as well as they do here, and maybe they pay more in taxes, but in general, according to this study, they're happier. Israel, of course, well, this is way before, October 7th of last year, which really changed the dynamic in Israel, both for the Israelis and the Palestinians. So that's a different story. But even Costa Rica, not a wealthy country. Beautiful country from what I hear, but also very hot, a lot of big bugs, not a lot of infrastructure. But hey, the people there tend to be happier there than even someplace like Austria in Europe or Mexico in the US. Is part of that Costa Rica does not have a military? So they've got more money to do other things? Maybe. I don't know. So then we go on, Brazil, Luxembourg, Ireland, Belgium, and United Arab Emirates. So something to think about. And I think it helps illustrate that money is part of the overall equation, right? It is something we do have to take into consideration. But it's not necessarily what makes us happy. In fact, there are plenty of wealthy people that are very unhappy out there. And plenty of not wealthy people that are happy. So, okay, and I broke my remote. Oh, I thought this was an interesting quote. Some people are so poor, all they have is money. I have to think about that one. Okay, so you might know for many years I was a financial advisor. I had my own practice helping people with their financial planning. And I basically found that there are three approaches. The people that I could help, the people that would come to me, well, I mean, I could help people with advice, but the people where I could help them with some financial solutions, some financial products, let's say, were the people that had already saved up some money and they needed help figuring out what to do with it. Unfortunately, that's the way our finance sector is structured. Financial advisors don't make money helping people who don't have money. They make money helping wealthy people. And so that's where they focus their energy. And then people that aren't wealthy don't get the benefit of a financial advisor because none of them want to really spend the time. I remember back years ago, before I became a financial advisor myself, I talked to a financial advisor. We set an appointment. I showed him my finances, and he said, I can't help you. And I'm like, yeah, but, I need help. And he said, yeah, well, but I can't really help. And that really did not feel good, right? But I realized he was right. There was nothing he could do for me that would earn him any money. And he's in the business of making money, right? He's not in the education or charity business. So the people that would come to me that I could offer a solution to were people who had earned money from their work typically over decades. They had saved money and they had invested, for the most part, wisely. And sometimes these people had $100,000 in their retirement account. Sometimes they had $1 million in their retirement account, or sometimes more. And so there are all these financial solutions to help them protect their money, to help them maximize their money. And so that's what I would do with my clients. Typically, where their wealth came from was real estate and retirement plans. So if they had worked, I'll give you an example. I had this one couple as clients. She was a teacher. He, I think, was a firefighter or policeman, something like that. But both of them had pensions. And they retired fairly young. Like, I think after about 20 years of work, they both retired. So they were probably in their late 40s, early 50s. And they were each getting $4,000 or $5,000 a month from their pension. That means together they had about $100,000 a year to live on in retirement. That's good planning. Pensions are great. You can get a government job like they had. That's usually the only place you can get pensions, is government jobs. Well, that'd be government, right? Military pensions are the same thing. Now, most employers got away from pensions. Instead, what they offer is a 401k. Or there are other variations, but usually a 401k. And the way that that works is, in fact, we'll get into more detail in a future week, but you put some money in out of your paycheck. They might put some money in too, which is great. If they put money in, it's just extra money that you get. So if your employer does offer matching where they put money into your 401k, I would probably take advantage of that in general. But the idea is then that money, you get to decide how it gets invested. And then over the years, you keep putting money in, your employer keeps putting money in, and the investments do well, it should grow, and maybe you will have $1 million when you retire or more. But if you don't really know how to manage your money or how to invest that money, you might pick the wrong fund, right? And they usually have somebody at your, or at least through your employer, that they don't work typically for your employer, they work for the 401k company that your employer chose. And there's somebody there that can answer questions, but they usually are not going to be able to give you financial advice. And so you're kind of on your own, and you just hope you pick the right investment. And you hope that whatever that investment is does well, because sometimes the stock market goes down, sometimes it goes up. So we'll talk about that. But some of my clients did, have 401ks that had grown to pretty big amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So those were the people I could help. The ones that earned a good income, saved part of that, and then invested wisely. We also have those people who try to beat the system. I think you might know people like this, right? They're always looking for a shortcut, like, oh, I'm going to buy this stock, and I'm going to buy this crypto, or hey, my buddy has this thing, I put some money in, he promised he'll give me some money back with some interest. You're looking for shortcut, right? And it might work. Often it doesn't. And even if it does work, it's not sustainable. It's not something that you can rely on, right? Buying lottery tickets, for example, right? You might get lucky, get back your money or more, but most people don't. Right? The lottery provides money for education. I think in most states that's the way it works. The proceeds go to education. which tells you there's more money coming into the lottery program than there is going back to the people that bought the tickets, right? It's just like a casino. The house generally wins. It's kind of rigged against you. So trying to beat the system, I don't think is a good strategy. Even if somebody gets lucky and they hit it big, they make $1 million in crypto. Okay, well, what did they learn from that process? Do they know how to keep that million? Right? Or are they now going to go bet the million and end up losing it? So I don't recognize that. I don't recommend that strategy. Another strategy I don't recommend is just hoping everything works out. Like, oh, you take one job and then you switch to a different job and another job. Then you find you're 50 years old and you're thinking, oh, maybe I should save for retirement. Oops, a little late, right? So that's not a great strategy. It's important to have some goals, to have a plan. Okay, questions or comments? Oh, I love this quote. So you might know P.T. Barnum. He was a famous circus person, very wealthy and successful with his circus back in, like, I don't know, 19th century, I think. But I love this quote. However easy it may be to make money, it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth consists simply in expending less than we earn. Did you ever get a new job or get a raise where now you're making more money, but then you find that your expenses went up just as much? It's just human nature. We take the path of least resistance. We have more money, we spend more money. And it takes a lot of discipline to not do that. So what does he recommend? Wear the old clothes a little longer if necessary, live on plainer food if need be, a penny here and a dollar there, placed at interest, meaning invested, goes on accumulating, and in this way, the desired result is attained. Very simple advice, but I think it's very wise. So what we're going to be focusing on today is developing some goals. So we're not going to do it just yet. We'll get to it. But how many are already familiar with this term, SMART goals? Quite a few. Very good. So for those who are not, when you set a goal, it's a good idea to make it a SMART goal. And it's an acronym. A SMART goal is specific, so that you know once you've achieved it, right? Because if it's vague, you never really know. Did I achieve that goal? I don't know. What was the goal? So it needs to be specific, something you can measure, something you can attain. If you set a goal that's too high, it's not going to be motivating. It might even be demotivating, right? Make sure your goals are attainable. You can have stretch goals. You can have goals that are like, well, you know, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to push myself. That's okay. But if it's so high that you just don't even believe that you can do it, then it's not attainable. Goals have to be relevant. They have to be something that's important, that's going to help you achieve what's important to you. Not, I mean, you can set goals because somebody else wants you to, but try to make your goals relevant to your own path and what's important to you. And then it's important to have some deadlines. Because if you just leave it open-ended, you tend to push it off. So those are the components that make up SMART goals. There is an extra credit activity in the course. If you go to the extra credit module, there is one there on goal setting, which is a little different from the goal setting we're going to be doing today. So you can do that extra credit activity anytime this semester. if you do that activity, try to make your goals SMART goals. And you do not have to explain to me why they're SMART goals. I can just tell by looking at the goal. Okay? Because I have had students do that, where they say, this is how the goal is specific, and this is how it's measurable. And you're welcome to do that, but it's going to take you a lot of time. So do not worry about telling me how they're SMART goals, but do have it in your mind. As you're setting these goals, try to make them SMART goals. Now, the goals that we're going to be working on later on today, I've divided into 3 basic categories. These are just categories I came up with, nothing official. But I have categories related to your growth as a person, related to health and safety, and then financial. And later on, we'll go through each of these to make sure that the meaning is clear. But I tried to put which level of Maslow's hierarchy I felt that that goal related to, just to give you some context. Okay. So before we get there, before we actually do our individual activity, there was an article I read once that I thought was very wise and very useful. And the article was about how a married couple can make difficult decisions together. But I think it applies not only with married couples and not only with financial decisions. I think it applies anytime you and somebody you care about need to make a decision together. If you follow these steps, I think you will have better results than you would otherwise. And so I think in terms of goal setting, these are really useful. Right now, maybe you're single, and very independent, and you can make your own goals. But maybe you have somebody significant in your life that you need to make your decisions together with. And even if you don't now, maybe at some point in your life you will. So you can apply this again with anybody that you need to make decisions with. All right, so let's go through this process. I think there are like 9 or 10 steps altogether. So imagine you and somebody important to you have an important decision to make. And it's something where you've got different feelings about, right? Everybody has different perceptions. And it might even be something where it might cause some stress between you trying to make this decision together. I mean, it's hard enough to make decisions on our own, right? Let alone with somebody else. So if you follow these steps, I think you'll find it makes the process a lot more pleasant. And I'm speaking from experience. I can tell you, there were times my wife and I could not talk about money. Didn't matter that I had an MBA, I was a financial advisor. I was probably making it even worse because I have my views on things and she had different views. And there were times we would try to have conversations and we would just kind of go into this pattern. We would just keep going in this circle and it'd be frustrating. And fortunately, we learned how to be better at making decisions together. But part of it was these steps. Some of this I had to kind of figure out on my own. And then when I found this article, I'm like, oh, wow, I wish I had found this a long time ago. Okay, so step 1, set the scene. If you're trying to make an important decision together, and you're flying down the highway and the kids are screaming in the back seat, it's probably not the ideal time, right? So you want to create an environment where you can be focused, you can be relaxed, you can have a conversation. Makes sense, right? Now, I would say I'm very much the product of growing up in America. I tend to go straight to business. I'm not that much of a chit-chatty type of person. I recognize the importance of that, but I always feel like I'm in a hurry. So I would naturally kind of skip this step and go directly into what's the problem, how do we solve it? But that's not what it says here. It says start with a warm-up. Now, again, this was written by a marriage counselor. So she is, again, writing from the framework of a married couple. And she says, begin with a reminder that you are friends and helpmates. So, okay, helpmates maybe doesn't apply. I'm not even sure what that means. But at least a reminder that you're friends, right? You're trying to make a decision together because you care about each other. Makes sense, right? Start with that reminder.
That's really cool.
Yeah, seems corny to me, but it works, right? And it really is important. And then ask for help. Okay, so here it says a few moments of reflection to get you in the consulting mood. So what might that be? For some people, people of faith, it might be prayer, it might be meditation. It might just be, hey, let's just sit down, have a cup of coffee, or maybe coffee's not a good idea. It makes people nervous. Maybe have a cup of tea, have a soda, whatever. Let's just relax, listen to some music before we start having this conversation. Whatever works for you, right? Again, it helps to kind of set the mood. And then agree on one clear purpose. Now that is not necessarily that easy. What do we want to get out of this conversation? One person might be saying, I want us to save more money. The other person might be saying, I want to be able to spend more money. And if you go into the conversation, each thinking that the end result is something different, of course you're going to go in a circle, right? Of course it's not going to go anywhere. But if you can agree that, hey, let's have a conversation about how we can better manage our finances, or how we can better create a situation where we're saving and able to spend as much as we feel we need to spend, right? If we can come to an agreement on what the goal is of this conversation, we're halfway there at that point. If you just start talking without agreeing on that, again, it's going to lead to problems. And this is true in any time you're doing any group decision making. You always have to define what decision are we trying to make. Don't just assume that you all agree on that. Okay, then gather the facts. If you're talking about a budget, how much are we spending now? How much money is coming in? If you don't have that information, it's going to be hard to talk about it, right? You might want to pull up the bank statement or do some analysis in advance so you've got some concrete facts to deal with. And then, now this is a cultural thing, but it is something to be aware of. It says take turns talking. There are cultures that don't do that, where people talk at the same time, and they're okay with that for whatever reason. I don't know how you listen to somebody and talk at the same time, but people do that. Even in that case, though, how are you really going to truly hear the other person, right? Even if that's your culture, try not talking while they're talking and see if you maybe hear them better. And while they're talking, don't be thinking about what you're going to respond with, because that causes you to not hear what they're saying, right? Try to really, truly listen to what they're saying and understand where they're coming from. Then, when they're done, sometimes they might not be done for a while, and you have to say, hey, can I say something? But when it's your turn, then you share what you have to share, right? And hopefully they'll listen to what you have to say. Okay, so then here's some things to watch out for in the process. You start to feel like you're getting defensive or the other person's getting defensive, okay? That's a sign that, hey, the car's veering towards the cliff, right? And it could get back. It could turn into an argument, right? And that is not ideal. If it's an argument, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. People make up, but it's better if you can just not have it go there, right? If you can just stay on track. So if you are becoming defensive, what can you do? Now, we can't control other people, right? But we can control ourselves, hopefully. So remind yourself that you don't have to agree. If you find yourself getting defensive, again, try to recognize that in yourself. Maybe take some deep breaths, whatever helps you get into a more mindful state. And again, try to listen to what they're saying without letting yourself be triggered. Not easy to do, it takes practice, but try to do that. If you find that you are criticizing the other person, that's not going to be productive. Okay? People can be very sensitive to criticism. So instead, ask yourself, do I have a request to make? In other words, maybe the person's tone of voice has increased. They're getting excited. You could say, don't have to get emotional, but that would be a criticism, right? Instead, think, okay, do I have a request? You could say something like, I'd like to know what you're feeling right now. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, but I know that opening up and having people talk about what they're feeling is more productive than reacting to their feelings. Then it says flooding. Okay, that is the feeling where you can feel your emotions start to well up. Maybe you're starting to feel physically hot. There's some kind of tingling sensation, and your stomach clenches up, your teeth start to grit. Okay, you're flooding with emotions, or maybe it's more sad kind of emotions, but whatever it is, if you feel that, maybe you do need to take a break. Maybe you can say something like, hey, I think this conversation is making progress, but I need to take some time right now. That's okay. It's better than letting things escalate and then get ugly. And avoid mind reading. Right? We don't really know what's going on in our own heads, let alone other people's heads, right? So again, it goes back to listening, trying to really understand where the other person's coming from. Okay, so now that you've gone through this process, you've had an open conversation, but compassionate conversation, then you can eventually, and it might take multiple meetings, but eventually you reach a decision. You have your budget, something that you can both support. Great, you have a decision and a plan for action. How are we going to monitor this budget? How often are we going to review the budget and see if we need to change it? Right? That would be part of the action plan. So you might end up having to give up some of what you wanted. Maybe the spending amount or the saving amount or some aspect of the budget or whatever the decision is not 100% what you wanted. But at least you've reached a point that you can live with and you can support. It's called consensus. Consensus means you get to something everybody can support, even though it's not exactly what they want. Then, step 9, write down who's responsible for what. Who's going to be checking the bank account? Who's going to be whatever, keeping track of when it's the next time to have a conversation about the budget, so that it's clear. Because otherwise it just doesn't get done, right? Or somebody feels like, why do I always have to do this? So you agree on that. And then you go ahead and plan, when is the next time we're going to talk about this? So I think it's safe to guess that if you've ever had to sit down with somebody that you care about and have a difficult conversation and make a decision together, you probably didn't go through all these steps. And it might even seem awkward. But I think if you try it, if you practice it, and if the other person is practicing it as well, you know, you're not just trying to tell them what you're doing, but you explain to them the steps and they say, oh yeah, this makes sense. Let's do this together. I think you will find you get much better results. And it's a much more pleasant process than just, you know, fist fights or whatever happens. So keep that in mind. Again, anytime you're trying to set goals or make decisions with somebody else. All right, questions or comments? It might be telling you what you want to hear, not, yeah.
My husband is bored.
In order to just get out of the meeting altogether, or what?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Do that. And then a week later, we're due. Did I say that? I'm like, you can find any excuse of
Okay.
getting out of the agreement.
So again, I'm not a marriage therapist.
No, it's just funny because you were talking about this,
Uh-huh.
two biggest financial things that we just had.
I mean, it's an issue in any family, because if you're a couple, you're gonna have to at some point discuss finances, right? And there's always gonna be a difference of perspective, so, okay. So that's the lecture portion for today. I'm going to pause the recording. Stop the recording, actually.